future endeavors as well. I do want to note that we did have a really successful call yesterday with the Office of Open Government and the Office of Talent and Appointments, the Mayor's Office. I want to thank them both for their support of lots of the boards and commissions and their work that is going on to make sure that the business of government continues as much as possible, or in many cases stops and waits until there is until we are in the recovery period, and they're doing a really great job there. So part of what we've learned is that these meetings that we're having virtually are now allowed and appropriate for us to do virtually. We can do votes virtually. All votes will need to be roll call votes, and so we are doing our best to try to make sure that everyone has access to that, including members of the public. And I want to note that there are a number of the members of the public that are watching and listening to the meeting today. Thank you for joining us for this virtual meeting, and please do feel free to use the chat function. Our working sessions are closed to public comment, but they are open in terms of we want you to be here and watching and listening to us as well. So feel free to use the chat function. I can't guarantee that we will get to any questions from members of the public today, but we will follow up with you if the staff will follow up afterwards to make sure that we can get that as part of our official record for the meeting. The other quick thing that I wanted to note is the budget. As I have mentioned in some conversations with individual board members, because of what the economic impact is going to be to the district because of this pandemic, the income figures, the revenue figures for the district for this current fiscal year that we're in are going to be significantly less than what was anticipated when the budget was passed last June. And so I think there is a good likelihood that all agencies are going to be asked to participate in finding some funds in their budget to cut, so that we do not go into the red as a government. As many of you know, the DC government is under federal law that if we go into the red in our budget in a fiscal year, it is automatically brings back the Financial Control Board, which means that the federal government would then be in control of the finances of the district. That is certainly not something that we want, and so it is something that we'll need to participate. The second piece has to do with the FY 2021 budget, which is coming up. The budget process has been postponed until April or May, but the timing of it is challenging for everybody, because it is not anticipated that the new revenue estimates from the CFO will not be coming out publicly until about 2 days before the mayor is required to submit her budget for FY 2021. So that normally gives normally that process is about probably 3 months between those dates. And so there's a lot of work to be done between the two times to make sure that we are prepared for that budget hearing. And I want to note as well that Serena, Dan, and I had check-in calls today with Chairman Mendelson's office, as well as with Councilmember Grasso's office. Both offices have been very supportive and interested in the work that we're doing, especially now in this virtual reality, in this new reality of virtual communications. And I want to call out them specifically for their support. Thank you, Madam President.
Okay, so I think we will go straight to the reports from the Ombudsman and the Student Advocate. Do we have an order on that? I can't move my agenda.
Yes, I believe Serena will be going first.
Okay, terrific. Hello, Serena, welcome. Serena is our Chief Student Ombudsman.
What?
Our Chief Ombudsman.
I'm just the Ombudsman, not the Chief.
Okay.
In any case, it's been a while since we've presented before the state board. So instead of doing the quarterly report, we're really just doing a mid-year summary. As everyone has already echoed, really everything that's going on with the coronavirus is more important, quite frankly, than a lot of the content that's in the mid-year report. but I'll go ahead and do a few highlights. So I hadn't received any questions from the state board members. So the first thing that I wanted to point out is, our office has continued to receive an increase in call volume compared to years prior that the office has existed. So far within this school year, we've seen a 41% increase in our total cases that the office has taken on. Last year, we also started to report out on the number of students who are receiving special education services. And this year, we have about 50%, which was the same as reported last year. So our numbers on that are pretty consistent. In terms of the grade band on some of our cases and the school sector, really, so I'll go through those two quickly. Still, we do get a huge chunk of cases from elementary school, and about a quarter of our cases in middle school and a quarter in high school. As far as the school sector, again, our numbers are pretty consistent from last year. The overwhelming majority of our cases are coming from DCPS, and if we get a few, maybe about a quarter to a third from charter schools. The only difference that we're seeing really this year is a shift. Whereas last year we got more out-of-boundary calls from students who are attending schools that are not within their boundary. This year we're getting more in-boundary calls. Similar again to last year, our top topic areas are around communication and engagement, bullying, student safety, and special education. We have done some work to refine our data tracking and reporting. So we started to ask a lot more questions within specific topic areas. You'll see in the PowerPoint presentation, bullying is sectioned out, the discipline data and the special education data are all sectioned out. Very quickly, I will say on the bullying sort of refined data, one of the things that we see is most of the bullying that's happening is either physical assaults or verbal. We're not seeing a ton of cyber bullying with this new sort of distance learning. I don't know what's going to happen, or even if people will consider social media bullying as, I don't even know if they'll call to report those kinds of things anymore. The other thing that we saw for the mid-year data is the length of time that the alleged bullying had been going on. And in most cases, it was longer than a month. In some cases, the allegation was that it was continuing from the previous year. I'm going to skip over the discipline stuff and really just jump quickly into the special education data. For both our 504 plans as well as our students who have IEPs, what we see is that problems are coming in not during the evaluation period. It's really after the student either has the 504 or has the IEP. So the challenges that at least most of the families who are calling our office about, the challenges that they face are really about getting the services or feeling like the services aren't really working to help improve the ultimate outcomes, education outcomes for their students. I think that's it for me. Did you all have any questions that you wanted to ask?
Serena, this is John Paul. I actually have a question, and it relates somewhat to the work that you're seeing. I mean, there is certainly a drop off in calls right now, but were there? I want to try to commend you and your staff in terms of being able to switch over from a in-person call center type environment to the telework in less than a day. And this goes for the Office of the Student Advocate as well. I mean, I think members, the switch from in-person to the telework from my side was flawless for the Office of the Ombudsman and the Office of the Student Advocate. And I think both offices really deserve a lot of kudos and credit for rethinking their entire work plans to meet the need of students and families where they are. And I just wanted to make that sort of announcement or public praise, because they have really done an amazing job.
Thank you very much for that. I'm definitely very grateful that I feel like our team has been really, really strong, and I'm grateful for all the support that we get from the state board in terms of that administrative help and support. Yeah, but and I give most of the credit to my staff on that.
Hi, Serena. This is Zach. Well, John Paul, I'm sorry. Did you have another question or a question? Sorry.
No, go ahead.
Okay. Uh, Two questions I have. One is, it seems like bullying spiked between quarter 1 and quarter 2. Do you have any insight on why that might be the case? And then secondly, as it relates to special education, it seems like more of the issues cited here are around implementation. Can you give a bit more context around like what are the issues parents are citing at the school level?
Sure. So I'm going to start with the bullying question and just answer in order. I think with the spike, right? I think part of that is mostly because parents have been waiting and trying to work with the school to resolve the issue on their own. I think in some cases, I mean, there have definitely been investigations, and then they'll do a lot of schools do the mediations. And then sometimes the parents will feel like it's still not working. And that's when they really start to look for external resources outside of the school. And I think so it goes back to the point on, I think it's slide 12, that talks about the length of the alleged bullying and that it's been going on for at least a month. Yeah, so I think that's the main reason why we see that spike in quarter 2. Unfortunately, because
Sorry.
no, go ahead.
A wondering I was having is just the power of word of mouth. And if parents who were encountering bullying issues maybe told other parents, and then therefore you had more parents calling in because maybe at first they were trying to handle it on their own.
Yeah, I think that that's possible. We do ask parents whether how they found out about our office, and I mean, in some
Okay,
cases,
terrible feedback. So if somebody is providing that, turn it off.
okay. So we do ask, how families have heard about our office, but we have not yet broken that down in terms of topic area. So I don't know if we have like a higher trend for like word of mouth referrals when it comes to bullying cases. But it's quite possible. For your second question on the concerns with the IEPs and the implementation of the IEP really being the biggest challenge. Really what that means, the implementation is really that the parents feel like the IEP is not being followed. So maybe the student has, service hours with related service hours, and the parents saying, my kid's not getting those service hours. Yeah, so it's really like there's nothing wrong with the IEP itself. It's just that the IEP is not necessarily being followed, and the parent is not seeing progress. So like they're not seeing the improvement in grades. They're not seeing the child meeting those IEP target goals. Those are the cases where it's an implementation issue.
Thanks.
You're welcome.
Serena, I had a question related to your point about the fact that there's not really any reports of cyberbullying right now. And it made me realize that, and as you pointed out, parents may not really think to report that. And I'm wondering if there are things that you would like us to sort of message to parents around things like that they can reach out to you. And this is true for Dan as well. That would be specific to this time, what's happening now.
No, Emily, I think that's a really great question. And I think that we're sort of trying to figure all that out. We're rethinking marketing strategies, and particularly for my office, like really looking for more opportunities to engage in sort of the social media marketing, which isn't really something that we've done a lot of in the past. But given the circumstances, we definitely need to. I think as we find more answers to that question, I mean, I'm happy to send that information out. But I think that the messaging has to be that we're here, our offices are still open. And the reality is that even though students are doing distance learning and school is sort of like closed, we're still here to support families and children and schools through this very difficult time.
Thank you. Members, I will remind everyone to try to use the hand raising for next questions. That way we can keep make sure that we get to everyone. Ruth, I think you had a question.
I've got a question. Can you hear me?
Fraser, can you wait 1 second? Let Ruth go first, and then we'll go next. And Ruth, I think you need to unmute.
Yes. Well, first of all, I just want to say the same that John Paul did about both Serena's work and Dan's work. It's really great. And thank you so much. The city is so lucky to have you both where you are. And that's really my question. I'll ask the same to Dan, whether you have anything that you can say thus far about issues in this new world with the distance learning and so on. We're going to talk about it later. And if you're going to stay, you can also raise it then. But any quick capsule summaries of it that we should know?
I mean, I think ultimately, in my opinion, it does make sense to talk about. I will stay on at least through that section. But I will say, in general, for my office, we've seen a sharp decrease in the number of calls that we've gotten. The few calls that we have had about the coronavirus and sort of access to education and curriculum has really been about communication, right, with the school. So they told me to show up at 11 to pick up the packet. I showed up, no one was in the building, and I couldn't get the materials for my student. What do we do? Those kinds of issues. I mean, we know. I mean, I think we've all been. Dan and John Paul and I, we've been on calls. We've had sort of the conversation, and I'm happy to participate in that section again.
Thank you. And then I note Fraser has a question, and then Zachary has a question as well.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Where is I don't see any hand raising thing.
I'll send you instructions on that separately.
Okay. The question I have for Serena and for Dan is, what about the homeless children? How are they dealing with distance learning?
So I don't want to take away from Dan's time and his actual presentation. And I do feel like your question is a great question and totally appropriate. And it would fit better if we saved it until we got to the coronavirus distance learning challenges.
Thank you.
Zachary?
Hi. Very quickly, Serena, thanks for all of this information, very helpful. Outside of general referrals to your office, how else can members be helpful to the work that you and your team are doing?
Sure. I mean, I think if this were normal circumstances, I would talk about policy recommendations. At this point, I feel like continuing to actually, here's what I'd really say. I think at this point, you all probably have built strong relationships with the schools in your neighborhood, with your principals, your administrators, any information that you can share with us about what they're experiencing, and making sure that they know that we're still here, we're still open, but sharing that information back would actually be really helpful specifically to my office, and asking them how we can help support them, like specifically the Office of the Ombudsman, as well as the Office of the Student Advocate. Sorry, Dan, I'm speaking for you in this moment, but I don't think you'll object. But asking how we can be helpful to them. And I think that in the calls that we've had, mostly related to our older cases that we're trying to process, what we're hearing is a lot of principals who are really highlighting the equity challenges that they are experiencing and that students are experiencing. A lot of overwhelm, a lot of stress, just a lot of fear for their staff as they're still coming to the building to prepare materials and send those materials to students. So all of those things, the more information that we have about that, also the more that we can frame that information in light of what we're hearing from the parents and the families and put all of that together to make recommendations that make sense in this time period to be pushed out. Is that helpful? Does that make sense?
Totally.
Right. Thank you for Serena for helping us to stay on track. So Dan? Is Dan there?
Oh, I think I just got to unmute. Everyone hear me? Can you hear me? No?
We can hear you, but if you could move a little bit closer to the microphone, we're getting some echo.
Oh, sorry about that. Better, folks can hear me?
Yes, thank you.
Okay. So our quarter one and quarter two for our office student advocate, we were trending on track as we have been, continuing to grow. For quarter one and quarter two, we saw around 273 families. 372 total contacts with families reaching through the hotline, through the RFA process. 273 of those resulted in us providing some type of service through information and resources, referral, or providing a more intensive connection. In addition to that, the things that we definitely saw the most of was enrollment access, special ed, student safety, and student discipline. Conversely, this year was probably the first year student discipline has been below 10%. Student discipline is generally in our office trended around 16%. So that may be due to some, this being early in the school years in quarter one, quarter two, as well as some of the recent laws that were passed with the student access to school act. Our special ed, when we look at our special ed numbers, since that is our leading kind of outlier, we saw a substantial calls related to IEPs. The next one was special ed placement, and then finally transportation. When we look at the IEP calls, were generally for the most part around similar to Ombudsman calls around goals not being met, delegates, implementation, changes that parents wanted to see made at the beginning of the school year that wasn't carried through for the previous school year. In addition to that, the majority of our special ed placement calls from quarter one to quarter two, actually all of the special ed placement calls were related to students attending our traditional neighborhood schools. And our transportation calls were there as well. Quarters one and two, ECPS continues to be the majority of our students are seeking out services from. This is something that we've always been working harder on, is trying to increase our connectivity to our English language learning community. So I think, in general, we see around 88% of our, this year, 88% of the, according to around 88% of our respondents were African American. But when we looked at, when we just spoke on our calls, when we were speaking, when we were taking non-English calls, 61% of those calls came from Spanish speaking families. Wording continues to be the driver of our activity, with around 31% of all calls coming from Ward 8. Wording families, Ward 7 falls up around 26%, and then with Ward 5 and 30% 11%. Conversely, this year, Ward 5's for school location for calls, or our phase political schools located outside of that ward. Ward 5 is definitely present at 21%. Ward 8 definitely over there at 24%, followed by Ward 7 at 18%. The past year generally was just Ward 6 that is in that's in the top three, but the top.
All right, Dan, are you completed?
No, so I skipped to our data. I'm just gonna run over real quick some of the things that we're doing outside of our curriculum. So we produced four major things this quarter one, quarter two. The biggest thing that's kind of up there right now is the Don't Leave Mental Health. It is a weekly podcast on IGTV series where we talk about mental health resources, we interview students, we interview staff, and kind of give parents more opportunities to get more clarity around the mental health school expansion and school-based mental health programs. In addition to that, we released the dyslexia guide. And the dyslexia guide, we did that with a partnership with Code Dyslexia DC. And it's a guide that's really kind of to give parents, staff, school staff, folks experiencing dyslexia an opportunity to kind of get a good foothold on what the baseline is, begin to really ask for help and kind of navigate that process, getting supports in place and getting supports and resources that they can use. Final two things that we produced out were our RI toolkit and our My Teacher DC toolkit. Both of those resources are online links, they're websites, and they're really generated. Our RI toolkit is created and generated for families, school leaders, school staff, students to really begin to have conversations around race and equity, and to have those conversations in safe environments. My Teacher DC website is definitely a website that's reflective of teacher representation. It's kind of what we're hoping to use as a supplement to parents who are going through the My School process to really figure out what are the diverse adult populations doing and how that can be reflected in unique student needs, their unique student needs. Look at some questions.
Great, thank you so much. I believe Fraser has a question. Fraser, you need to
I'm there. Dan, I've got a question that we really haven't talked about, and that is for you and Serena about gang activity. We have a real problem in Ward 4 with gang activity, especially in the high schools, but we have one middle school, McFarland, that also has a problem with it. Does that ever get into the Office of the Student Advocate or to the Ombudsman? Thank you.
Yeah, we've been in several conversations with students and families and school leaders in Ward 4.
Dan, this is John Paul. I'm sorry to interrupt you. We're still having some echo issues with your sound. If you can get a little closer or something, I think it'll help.
Is this better?
Yes, it is. Thank you.
Sorry, I'm a little extra burly, haven't been to the barber shop in a while. But more than anything, back to Fraser's question around the gang problem, some of the gang problems and some of the issues in Ward 1. So our office has been part of those conversations. We sit on the kind of student safety and safe passage task force group. In addition to that, part of those challenges have been kind of creating some resources that are unique and culturally responsive there. And so one of the biggest pushes was just making sure that there were folks in the building. I think a prime example would be the school security issue, making sure that there are school security and kind of security staff that are both bilingual. That has been one of those kind of stumbling blocks that this year that folks are trying to overcome and accomplish. In addition to that, some of the things that we've also seen was that the traditional solutions that we've seen for violence in Ward 8 and some of the other wards, with using violence interrupters and using some of the other things that came up in MIR Act, need to be tweaked a little bit more to kind of to be one culturally responsive and kind of inclusive of challenges that those communities face. And I think part of the challenge is that the gang, like you said, as you correctly pointed out, that there are gang culture, there's a gang issue there. Those are connected to international gangs that have a far-reaching effect for families that may that may still be families and relatives that are still in those other countries. So getting resolutions, getting things squashed requires a lot more, and it's a lot more intensive than what we've done in some other parts of the city as far as students.
Thanks. Emily?
Thank you, Dan. So I don't know, you may have addressed this already and I couldn't hear everything, but I'm curious to know if in the last 2 weeks since since the schools closed, if you've noticed a difference in the kinds of calls you're getting, if there's anything specific that has stood out in terms of what families are calling about.
Majority of the calls have been related to getting access to distant learning materials, distant learning software and networks. I think there's been several shifts since schools have gone to distance learning. Each LEA has their own learning software platforms, making sure parents and students have the right passwords and access to that is one part of the fight. The other part of the fight is when those things change. So when folks go from Zoom to Teams to Clever to whatever system that school is using, making sure all of the students have that access to it. In addition to that, all of this, shift to distance learning has also occurred during the, our challenge with the digital divide. So I'm sure maybe these first 2 weeks, parents are able to use, or students are able to use hotspots and Wi-Fi's and other kind of, Wi-Fi enabled phones to create some access. But I'm sure once folks can start getting bills and kind of getting the practicality of having your iPhone turned into a hotspot for 6 hours a day, I can see that changing.
Is that something, all of those things you mentioned are things that I've been hearing too in my ward, is that something that I should send parents to you for? Or like, I mean, are those issues that you're able to then direct them to resources, or are there resources that, you could share with us that we could then just push out to them? Or I don't know, I guess, I'm just wondering if that's appropriate for your office right now. And then I guess I'm just curious about special education. Have you been hearing from parents specifically about being able to access, or have their students' IEPs met? I'm sure.
Yeah, so as far as sending referrals, please, if you have families, you have parents or students that have issues with accessing material, please give us a call. We're talking to all of our LEA partners, trying to disseminate the information that they have out. Generally, most of the schools have been fairly good about making sure their IT staff are available for students and families when there's issues come up. I do know that there's been some challenges with some of the larger LEAs when they switched over from one kind of, I guess, conferencing software to another with passwords and access, and there's some hold up there. But outside of that, we're pretty well versed with our LEA partners. I do think there's going to be, the city is still experiencing a digital divide. There's, both PCSB and DCPS have made some orders to get more Wi-Fi and create more connectivity opportunities for our students. But I think there's, those things require time to get there, and it's just, a backlog. And I think this is something that not just DC is facing, the whole country is facing. So everyone is ordering Chromebooks, everyone's ordering hotspots, everyone's trying to increase their bandwidth.
Ruth?
Yeah, so mainly I want to use this moment to transition us into a discussion of Corona, because it seems like the right thing, the right time and the right place to do it. One thing I want to say is great thanks to Dan's office for putting together the guidebook on dyslexia and spelling difficulties. And I think you spoke a little bit about it, Dan. I couldn't fully hear. You're going in and out. I don't know why, what the deal is, but congratulations and thank you very much. I've heard already from a lot of the parent advocates around it. And maybe at another meeting, we'll hear more about that and how that's playing out. All right, John Paul, for the report on Corona, what we know and sort of what we're thinking about doing at the next meeting.
Great.
And also, let me just say, I am really trying to stay on a timeline, partly because last time was, we really went long, but also because it's going to be hard on this meeting. So we're moving.
So I do want to note that every other day of the emergency, I am doing calls with the DME, OSSI, DCPS leadership, Department of Parks and Rec, libraries, DOES, our lovely colleagues at the Thrive by 5 our organization, and others to talk about what resources we need as agencies, and also what are we seeing on the streets. And so there are a lot of things that are coming up, and the same things that we are all hearing, I think they are hearing too. And it's a really great opportunity for us to be participating together in terms of identifying potential resources, but also really thinking things through quickly. And so I've been collecting a number of the questions that I've been hearing from members, as well as from other sources, from our phone calls that we're getting in the staff of the state board. And I should note too that the state board staff is all now fully teleworking, including our fantastic fellows. And each of us, we're rotating through answering the phone every day. We're answering the same questions that we're getting related to student records, to access to technology and Wi-Fi and those types of things. We're getting those calls as well. And so we're trying to get as much information as we possibly can out to folks. The largest pieces of what we're hearing right now have to do, of course, with the distance learning piece. And I kind of broke those up in my mind into 3 different parts. The first is the access to Wi-Fi or some sort of technology in order to be able to access some of the distance learning activities. The second piece would be the technology, which is more like the tablets, the things, the physical devices that are needed to access some of the learning platforms, as well as some of the other pieces as well. And the third sort of set of that is how are we actually distributing that information, or distributing the devices, as well as the packets and all those types of things. And it appears that that schools are doing it differently depending on their school population and their leadership at the school. And so I think that's also part of the challenge, is that the LEAs are all sort of approaching this in a little bit different way. And so there isn't really a consistent way or guidelines of how to do this type of thing. And I think some of that is in part because, I mean, this is an emergency situation, right? Everyone had to kind of react immediately and just do it, and not really have time for the sort of long-term coordination of what we were hoping for. And I think that's, it's problematic too. To the points that were made earlier, it does speak a lot to the equity issues. And so there are certainly conversations going on how do we actually get Wi-Fi out to folks effectively, or to some sort of access to the internet. And for a while, the Department of DC Public Libraries, their Wi-Fi system sort of bleeds beyond their buildings, and so they intentionally left them on in a lot of locations, because they know that that is the only really access point to the internet for a lot of people. Unfortunately, what that means is that a lot of people know that and crowd those spaces in the parking lots around the library, and are therefore violating, social distancing. And so then that's a potential hazard for those individuals. Same sort of thing with the last piece related to the green spaces. One of the things that DPR certainly hoped to do was to try to keep the green spaces on as long as they possibly could, so that people could go out and exercise and get out of their house for a few minutes to be outside, because we all know that like being stuck in our houses is not a fun experience necessarily for most people, and especially those with children need to be able to get out and go outside. but unfortunately, the same thing. There was a number of instances of sort of violations of the social distancing, both at dog parks and at DPR facilities across the city. And so the decision was made that in order to protect safety, we need to close those down. And so as of this morning, all dog parks are closed. Most of the parks that can be closed are closed. Most of the school facilities, I live in wonderful Ward 4, and the field at E.L. Haynes is now fully closed and locked. And it's done to protect people, right? But it's still not easy to try to figure that out. But the mayor's order, the stay-at-home order, does make exceptions for walking and biking and hiking and getting out into and out of your houses. And so as long as you can do that with the people in your household and at a safe social distance from others, you can absolutely do those types of activities. And so part of what Ruth had asked me to do is also to invite the deputy mayor and other education agencies to come and present at our April 22nd meeting with the hopes, right, that by April 22nd, we are hoping that we will be fairly far through the response period and into the recovery period. And recovery for this type of situation means that we're planning ahead for what does happen next. What does this mean for our students? What does this mean for our parents and our families and all of those situations? There are certainly some challenges in all of these types of things, but so we were offering the opportunity for the deputy mayor to come and testify about those programs that are happening. The call today, I did want to note one other thing. I mean, the call today with the deputy mayor's office, including DOES, there was a pretty stark report from DOES about the numbers of unemployment claims that they've received. I mean, it's nearly 40,000 claims that they've received so far because of this crisis. And so that is a massive increase on the DOES staff. And so I'm expecting an email at some point soon from the city administrator asking DC employees to volunteer to be part of a emergency call center to help get those claims processed and out and through so that individual claimants can have access to their funds. So this really is like an all hands on deck, and we're doing our best to sort of do everything we can to make it easier for everybody, but it's not easy. So I think we're certainly I'm waiting for the deputy mayor's office to respond on whether or not they're available for that meeting, but I am encouraged by the openness that they've expressed in terms of working with the state board on those issues. And I think Zachary had a question, and then Ruth.
No question.
Okay, Ruth, did you have a question?
Well, so partly I just wanted to organize this. Partly these are questions to you, I think, about what's going on the conference calls. And then secondly, let's talk a little bit about what we're going to do at that meeting. I have one question, and this may be too much around recovery, but has there been serious discussion about sort of reopening for summer school and sort of finding a way to sort of really give back the education to the students who have missed it?
Sorry, can you say that one more time?
Yeah, has there been any discussion about summer school, about sort of reopening, I guess, during the summer so that students who missed all these weeks and months in the spring will be able to go back? It sounds like not. Sounds like that's too far down the ride. Yeah.
I think there's a little farther down into the recovery period, which again, I expect those conversations to start shifting within the next couple of weeks. But they're not there yet. I mean, I think that is something that people are thinking about, but it isn't to the level of where we would be able to discuss that yet.
All right, I'm not seeing other hands. So let me just talk a little bit about the public meeting. And so part of the idea, I think, is that we are all fielding a lot of questions and comments and concerns and recommendations, and the idea for the April meeting is sort of in the spirit of, as John Paul said, getting ready for a next step. Obviously, everybody, turned heaven and earth to get their lessons up. And, you know, there's all sorts of imperfections because obviously, so this is really in the spirit of what are we hearing that are worth people paying attention to going forward to make sure there's sort of an open feedback line. And that we would each, and I think we're doing this naturally, but collect what we're hearing and be able to bring it, possibly have people testify. We hadn't really talked about that. Maybe we just do it through ourselves. Might be logistically simpler, and then have a back and forth with the deputy mayor. Also, I think DCPS, I don't know if there's others. So
Ruth, I do want to note that Jessica did have a question, and Emily had her hand raised, but I think it's now been lowered. So I didn't know if you want to get to that or not.
yeah, that's fine.
Jessica?
Sure. Hi, thanks for recognizing me. I guess it's sort of a question comment. One thing I note is that we're hearing questions from our constituents that I hope are going to be answered perhaps before our April 22nd meeting, but not necessarily on the timeline our constituents may hope for them to be answered on. So I'd love to just hear from my colleagues how they're handling it. And I'll offer one example. So I got a call from a PTA yesterday saying, oh my gosh, the devices aren't being released by DCPS. We're going to buy devices for families. What do you know about the timeline for release of the devices? And the response I gave was, I don't know anything about the timeline. I do know that the district DCPS is working on a plan. What I can say is I have seen different schools handle lack of access to devices differently. And when I shared that this parent had not been aware of that. So for example, one middle school in my ward is having live class every day for 6 hours, 3 days a week. Another school, middle school within DCPS, is recording every teacher's lesson so that a student who can't participate live is able to access that later on YouTube. Another school still is having only 2 days of live classes that are academic classes and 2 days of specials classes. And while I think that there's good reasons that schools are doing it differently, I also think that we may become a little bit of a hub of sharing information to our constituents. So one of my hopes is that we can help people understand these phases that John Paul shared with us. But I'm curious how other folks are addressing those questions from our constituents and helping them recognize that it's not that folks aren't talking about these issues, but it may be that we're talking about them in phases that are different than how residents feel the need to talk about them.
I think I can really follow up on that. My comment was sort of related in that I have been also getting emails and also trying to reach out to school leaders to find out what their main concerns are. And my approach has been to kind of see this as a learning phase, both in terms of what the main issues are, even though we can guess what they are, but also how school leaders are thinking about, responding to, for instance, the need for devices, how to distribute them safely, how to make sure that families have hotspots. And I would add in Ward 1 and 4 especially, but not just our wards, how to help families who are undocumented, who are afraid to apply for things or to come forward. And so right now I'm in collection mode, I guess. And I'm wondering if, sort of to John Paul's point of everything feeling very like we're just jumping into it, is that sort of phase 2 for us at this point, like coming up with a more organized and cohesive way in our agency anyway to collect that information, and then we can better discuss how to respond to it. So that's one. And I just want to say specifically about sort of safe distribution. I did see one school in my ward had started to distribute devices, and there were 2 security guards on site and 1 staff member that I could see, and they were not helping the families who were lined up to practice safe distance. And I talked to them about it, and they were very dismissive. And I guess it made me realize, again, to your point, John Paul, that there's really no consensus, or there's no guidelines for, what people who are in charge can and should be saying to folks, right? And I think that might be phase 2 as well, is like, can we advocate for sort of a common understanding about how to convey that to security guards, police? Yeah, so that's my.
Yeah, I mean, I don't mean to say that there isn't communication certainly going on between the leadership and individual LEA leaders and that type of thing. I think there's also, there are some pretty significant shortages of time and resources. And so, again, going back to my earlier point, I think there are people are trying to get resources out to make sure that students have access to learning and that they have access to food. And that's the primary thing. And so, I got a call actually on Monday from a wonderful woman from Houston, who I won't name because she lives in Houston. But she called our line because she was very frustrated that the U.S. Postal Service carrier in her neighborhood was not wearing gloves and a mask. And I mean, clearly not much I can do about that, but I mean, I think that's part of the challenge, right? We have masks and gloves, but for first responders in hospitals, those are the people that need them most. And so some of that PPE, personal protective equipment that folks really should have, we don't have access to. And so there's the trade-off of, well, do you not provide information and materials to students, or I mean, anyway, I'm just trying to say that.
Can I just clarify though? I
Sure.
didn't mean like that they should have been handing out gloves and masks. They were not they weren't informed, weren't using the moment to inform families that like keeping 6 feet apart from other families was important. And it's, both an issue of safety in the moment, but also an opportunity to provide information. And I think if, I'm not even criticizing them, I'm just saying that it made me aware that that is an important like detail, I'm not expecting it because of what you said. It's like an emergency and let's just get these devices out. But what's clear to me were the security guards didn't have the language or the feeling that it was their place, actually, is what they said to me, to get that information out. So that's just, I think
that specific situation that you mentioned is something that I did bring up actually in a call with the DME, and they took it. They took the information and we're going to follow up with all of the special police officers as well as other personnel. I mentioned earlier the issues with DC public libraries and their Wi-Fi connections and that type of congregation. And the response was that, okay, cool, we're going to send staff out with resources so that the families know how to access it without coming here. In addition to shutting it off or having. So it is exactly what you're talking about, making sure that the information is saturated through everything that we possibly can. And I think too, I mean, DCPS, for instance, it has, as of today, I believe, is now doing classes on TV on Channel 16, which is pretty awesome. The fact that they were able to get something like that together in 4 days, 5 days, and be able to present it in a way that is workable for some families, I think is fantastic. And so, I do think that there is a lot of great stuff going on. I know we are already behind time. So Ruth, I don't know if you want to continue with this or move on.
Yes. Did you say Zach had his hand up? I can't really see here. So in terms of the next meeting, and I mean, I think Jessica put a question out there. As opposed to answering it, I think maybe we want to answer that more online with each other, because I think it's a very good question. Thinking about the public meeting, part of it is, I think, for us to collect these issues and maybe get them to the office so that they can be organized in some way. I mean, at some level, we'll all ask what we're going to ask, but it might be helpful. And it also would give us well, anyway, anything we can do, I think, to collect that kind of stuff. I'll just say, and actually think before we switch, if people want to say anything about how they're collecting information, collecting thoughts, and that might be good ideas for others. I mean, I'll just say, I put it in my newsletter, I put it up on our listserv, getting a lot of response. And to Jessica's question, mainly saying, I guess, what others are, which is the main thing we can do at this point is collect the concerns, and we know there's a lot of interest in responding to them. And that's sort of where we are.
Deja has a question.
Hi, can you guys hear me?
Yep.
Yeah.
Okay, this question may be sort of like, I guess, in the recovery phase, but I still want it to be factored in as we're just talking about this. Is there gonna be a plan for seniors as to like, if we don't have a prom, can it be like pushed back? Or, and same thing for graduation, if our dates don't happen the way that they're scheduled, is there a way we can still have it happen, maybe just at like a later date? Because I don't want it to be completely like, well, sorry guys, you know, there's nothing we can do. I want to stay as optimistic as possible about it. I mean, I understand if it can't happen, but I still would like there to be a conversation about still having these moments.
Yeah, I can say that those are definitely recovery type questions. It is definitely something that is on my mind, and I think on the minds of a lot of people. I was talking actually with some colleagues in Kansas earlier today. One of them had posted an April Fool's joke about how all students were going to just going to be restarting their year, and some people thought it was really funny, and some people did not think it was funny at all. But I think you're absolutely right, and I think that is definitely the considerations that we need to give to, especially to our seniors, but to other folks that are moving grades is very important. And once we get to that stage in the conversation, I think that's absolutely right.
Thank you.
All right. So
Marcus just raised his hand.
Hey, sorry, yeah, I couldn't find the hand thingy, so that was my way of getting in. I'll just say I also just wanted to encourage everyone as much as we can to share with one another resources that we're coming across, as we're also trying to connect our constituents, because as many resources as I think government is trying to provide, I think there are tons of community-based organizations and do-gooders who are trying to fill the gaps as well. And so really passing on right contacts to mutual aid organizations that are doing good work, or nonprofits that are providing food, organizations that are doing things like John Paul talked about, right? That's in terms of what the teachers union is doing around supplemental instruction. I'm partnering with a community organization to do a virtual story time tomorrow. And so really figuring out creative ways to fill those gaps as we figure everything out, I think it is also a role that we can play as well.
Yeah, and for those who are joining on the video chat, so part of the reason that our agenda keeps cycling through is because we have also on our list here listed a number of places where you can go and find resources for a number of different things, including early learning by Thrive by Five, some great listens on distance learning for DCPS, as well as for the charter board and for public libraries. So it's on the screen now, but if you can't get to it exactly yet, just feel free to email us at SBOE at dc.gov, and we'll make sure to get the resources out to you as well.
all right. So John Paul, you'll keep us in touch about whether we're going to have a panelist from government, and then also, do we have a plan? Are you still working on this? Do we want people to be able to send in video comments, questions?
So yes, we can get to some of that related to specifically to the social studies in a little bit. The social studies standards has a specific request related to that for students. But for individual public testimony, yes, we will be putting out information about how to present testimony in either audio or video form within the next week or so.
It sounds like for raising questions about the coronavirus, it's probably best if we just collect that and we ask it, make it more like a panel in that sense. Sounds to me.
I mean, I would not wait, right? If members have information or members of the public have questions and information, absolutely send it to us now so that we can try to get answers and then have those answers ready either through our website or through the coronavirus.dc.gov website, which is the sort of catch-all for all resources related to any of these questions. And so, yeah, so right there on the screen, so the coronavirus.dc.gov is the sort of catch-all, and this is where all the government resources are. And so members of the public, if they have questions about anything related to it, you can go there first and see if your question can be answered. If not, do email us, email the mayor's office. We're all kind of working together to make sure that we can that nothing gets lost in the mix. So this is all very helpful.
All right, moving on to census, and John Paul is our star tonight. John Paul is presenting on the census. Today was Census Day, I guess.
I'm lucky enough to not have to present on the census because we have some wonderful presenters who have joined us from the U.S. Census who will be talking about this. So Sonia, I think Alex is going to make you the presenter, and we're going to switch over that way.
Excellent. Thank you very much. I want to make sure I don't have an echo. Awesome. So hello, everyone. Thank you for your time. My name is Sonia Harris-Ladovich. I am from the U.S. Census Bureau. And I don't quite see the PowerPoint presentation yet, but I will get started in interest of time, if that's okay.
Go ahead. Thank you.
Information that I'm going to cover will be available for everyone. That way you won't miss out on anything. So I'm just going to give a really quick overview of the census.
Sonia, if I can just interrupt you 1 quick second. If you can turn down the volume on your computer, echo is happening there.
How's that? Excellent. Okay, great. So I'm going to give a real quick overview of the census, why it's important, and what the DC State Board of Education can do to help ensure we have a complete count for the census, for the 2020 census. So as you guys may or may not know, like you said, today is Census Day, April 1st. It means this is the day we take a snapshot of the self-response for the nation. We will continue to count into the end of July. Some of our operations have been postponed due to what's going on in our nation right now, but we are learning things as you guys are. And so we will continue to push information out as we learn it, as we find out as far as our operations, but we are counting as we speak. And so we're just going to give a really quick overview and there you go. I'll give a really quick overview and take questions, and then we can go from there. I think I have, all right. So the census is mandated by a constitution. The information that we use, the information that the census is used for is to draw congressional and state legislative district. The federal government distributes more than $675 billion to each state, which is then disseminated down to different counties. And of course, the districts, and that money is used for schools, it's used for roads and hospitals and daycare centers and things of that nature. And so when people do not respond to the census, that it's the district lines are affected, and also the monies that's distributed down to states are affected. So right now we are in the self-response stage of the census. We have started sending out postcards to households throughout the United States, asking everyone to self-respond. That first mailing went out March 12th, so some of you on the phone or on the line right now may have received your mailing. We will send a total of 5 mailings asking people to self-respond. After the 5th mailing, we will mail a paper survey and asking people to fill out the survey and send that back in. I'm not sure I'm able to. Okay, at the same time, and a little bit after, there's a little bit of, sorry, there's a little bit of lag in the PowerPoint, so I'm not going to worry about it. So after we ask people to self-respond, we go out and we do what's called a group quarters operation, where we reach out to institutions like schools, the military installations, anywhere where there's a group of individuals living. After this group quarters and self-response, if we still don't have responses back, we then do a non-response follow-up operation. And like I said, those operations, the timetables of those operations are being looked at as things progress with the current situation. And so we are putting that information out to our partners as we learn it. So today's April 1st, Census Day, we will ask people to self-respond. We will get out and we'll go out to group quarters. By December 31st, as it stands, we have to deliver aggregate numbers to the President of the United States. Okay. How did we determine how to count people? We first established where to count people. We went around through the United States and counted all the households by using a number of master address files. And then that's how we kind of tabulate. We have these households, and then we're looking for responses from those particular households. So I'm actually on slide number 8. So how do we get the word out about the census? In addition to our partners like yourselves that we reach out to, we rely on, we also rely on national, local, and social media, especially during these times, which is so important in getting the word out about the census. So not only are we educating community leaders, local government leaders, we're asking you guys to reach out to your constituents and the people that you serve in your communities, and educating them, encouraging them to fill out the census survey. Right now, it's easier than ever to do it online. We're all kind of self-quarantined and social distancing. It's easier than ever to do it online. And so we highly encourage everyone to fill out the census survey online. This decennial, 2020 in particular, is the first time that we've offered individuals a chance to fill out the survey online. So individuals can fill out that survey online. They can call in, and then they can also fill out the paper survey and mail that in. So what can you all do on this meeting right now? Like I said earlier, engage your constituents. We have toolkits for schools that we can send to you guys that you can mail out to your constituents. You can include information online on your websites. The schools can push information out to their parents about filling out the census surveys, reminding them to fill out the census surveys. There's information that parents would be interested in. And like I said, I won't go over it in detail, but I can send a couple of toolkits to Alex, and then he can distribute that to everybody. But we do ask you to ask all the schools if they can get involved in informing the students, the parents, and their constituents about the importance of census and how it affects the school's bottom line in funding when individuals don't fill out the survey. Like I mentioned earlier, every household will have an option to fill out the survey online. They can use the phone or by paper. You can also do it in person. I mean, someone can go online and it's 2020census.gov and they can fill out the census survey right then and there. So does anyone have any questions? I know that was kind of quick. In the interest of time, I didn't want to go really deep into the PowerPoints that we have, but does anyone have any questions? I want to leave you guys time to ask.
Sonia, this is John Paul. Thank you so much for being here. I do want to note for members too that we do have a number of those resources that you can use on your social media or in your newsletters, and I highly encourage you to use the information that the U.S. Census Bureau has put together in your newsletters for the next however many send out from now until the end of the census tracking time, to strongly encourage your constituents to fill out the census. I took it and it took, maybe 30 seconds maybe to get through the entire thing. I mean, it does not take long, but it is so important. And I really want to thank the U.S. Census Bureau and Sonia in particular for being willing to come and talk with us through this new virtual platform, but also to help get information out there. And I do want to note, that the mayor and the council is also doing a lot of this work, trying to get information out to residents of the district to make sure that we get all the money from the feds that we should be getting, which is also a really important thing, as we all know, for education. So I don't see any questions from the board members, but if there is, oh, sorry, Marcus raised his hand.
Thank you, Sonia, and thank you, John Paul, as well. Thank you so much for joining us. My question is, I think the messaging both locally and from the U.S. Census Bureau has really been centered around the April 1st date and really building momentum around today's date. And then it'll be April 2nd, right, tomorrow. And so how do you anticipate the Census Bureau's messaging evolving, right? I think a lot of human capital has been put behind having folks respond to this date. So when we're talking to our constituents tomorrow, do we say, all right, you're late turning in your get it in, or what do we say,
The message is the same. We're counting population until the end of July. And so our message will still be the same. The urgency for people to self-respond will still be the same. We will still highly encourage everybody to fill out the census survey online. Like I said, the sense of urgency is still the same. So when you're talking to individuals, parents, your constituents, let them know April 1st is a snapshot. We push everybody to that date because people like deadlines sometimes. And so it's not a hard deadline, but it is a goal for some people. Some people like that. But we are still counting tomorrow. I just received mine in the mail. So like you said, it takes all of a couple minutes. It's safe, it's easy, it's important, it's our civic duty. So depending on who you talk to, they will care about that. Some people will care about the funding that comes down. Some individuals will care about the redistricting. So the message is really tailored to who you're talking to. But Marcus, the message is still the same. The urgency is still the same. Last time I checked, nationwide, we're at 34% self-response rate, which is pretty good nationwide. It's like billions. It's just a lot of people. So yeah, it's still the same. Great question.
Okay, no, thank you. I'm the one for deadlines, so I got mine done on Sunday.
I could also note too, for members or for members of the public that are here that are in, doing Zoom happy hours or Zoom movies or any of those things with their friends and neighbors, make sure that they've filled out the census. let's make sure that we are utilizing all of our resources to get this count as accurate as possible.
I'm glad you said that, because you're absolutely right. It's we're reaching out to our partners, our constituents, our parents, but also our family and our friends. I have family in Chicago that historically typically do not respond. And so I'm on the phone with all of them on a daily basis, encouraging them to fill out the survey. So I'm looking at it from a different view now, working for the Census Bureau. I feel it's my duty to not only encourage, like I said, the people I work with, but also my friends and family. So you're absolutely right. Thank you for saying that.
Thank you. Any other questions?
Thank you very much, Sonia.
Thank you, Sonia.
And
It's my pleasure. Thank you so much.
Bye.
into Zoom, okay. All right, I think next is Zachary with the equity statement. So I have a question, John Paul, can you just brief us where we're gonna find that and go back to where to find this simply?
Yes, I'm actually going to chat it out.
Okay, all right, fine, even better.
Yeah. The document, as you all know, was a Google Doc, but because it had to be uploaded, there were some additions that were not captured. So if you give me 1 second, I thought I had this queued up, but I don't. In the meantime, I just want to provide a quick frame for the discussion we're going to have around the equity statement and the changes that we're proposing. And so the point of this is to provide us an opportunity to review our statement to see the ways in which we operate around it, we leverage it, we use it, and to see how we might adapt it moving forward and make it a bit more usable to our day-to-day functions as a board, as well as individual members and how they engage in their with their respective constituents. And I am chatting out the document now. So in the chat box, you should see the link to the Google Doc. This is also an opportunity for us to just revisit the statement. It's on our website. I know we are deeply focused and interested in equity. I will call out Alex or John Paul. Given the transition, some of the numbers are a bit warped. If while I'm framing this up, if you could help just adjusting that, that would be really helpful. The other thing I was just going to say is it provides us an opportunity as a board to come together to think about how we can use the statement as a tool for our future work moving forward. And so today's objective is for us to simply reflect on what changes, if any, we want to make to the statement. And as I mentioned offline through email, the hope is that in our May working session, we will then take the conversation to thinking about how we could use make this into a framework or a reflective tool of some sort. All right, so I will give people a second to just read what is captured here from Fraser, myself, Ruth, and if any, and Emily, thanks for you all for capturing your changes. If you were not able to jot down any proposed changes but would like to do so, feel free to add them at this time. And we'll take 1 minute to do that, and then we'll jump in. So that's been 1 minute. As for process, I'm going to read this statement out loud for those who may be joining by phone only and may not have this in front of them. And then I would love if Frazier, Ruth, Emily could just share what your proposed changes are. And then after each one, we engage in a brief conversation as a board. So actually, John Paul, just to break up who's talking or whose voice people hear, do you mind reading the statement for us? Sorry to put you on the spot.
Not a problem. So the DC State Board of Education defines equity in education as ensuring that every student, inclusive of race, religion, gender, and gender identity, sexual orientation, socioeconomic standing, immigration status, and disability status, has the supports and resources to be successful in school. We believe these supports and resources must be child-centered, evidence-based, and reflective of the social, emotional, and academic needs of the student, progressing towards the goal of success for every student, and reducing disparities will include monitoring student progress on standardized assessments and relevant academic and non-academic measures included in the SS STAR framework and report cards. By pursuing multiple measures of accountability, this system will hold all schools, school leaders, and staff to the same high expectations for progress and success for all students. The desired outcome will be that all DC students will graduate from high school fully prepared for college and career opportunities as engaged and active residents who are prepared to thoughtfully participate in society.
Thanks. So we'll start with Frazier. Frazier, do you just want to provide some context around your recommended change? And it was more so a thought as you proposed it to me.
Can you hear me?
Yep. There's an echo.
I don't know what happened. All right. Well, you take it over, Zach.
While Frazier figures out the echo situation, and thanks for that heads up, Ashley. I did make the document view only just so that there are not too many changes here, and I'll be sure to take notes as we're going along. I will just quickly frame the two proposed changes I made for lines 1 through 4 as it lists out all of the characteristics there. I just propose that we simplify that and say all, so that one, it's a bit neater, shorter, and more so importantly, we don't leave any categories out for students in terms of how they may identify. Another proposed change was in lines 6 through 8, which currently reads, progressing towards the goal of success of every student and reducing disparities will include monitoring student progress on standardized assessments and relevant academic and non-academic measures included in the SS STAR framework and report cards. I proposed taking out the phrase standardized assessments, one, because I thought it was a bit redundant because we then right after that say academic and non-academic aspects of the report card. So those were the two very minor changes that I proposed.
Anyone comments as we go, or how do you want to do this?
I was thinking we would have a discussion after each, but it may be more efficient to just read all of the proposed changes and then just allow people to jump in. So thanks for the grace. We're going to just adapt in the moment. Ruth, do you mind just discussing your proposed changes?
I turned it off so that you wouldn't hear my meowing for dinner. Okay. So there were a couple of things. The first edit on lines 1 through 4 was also the order so that the goal is reaching the standard. Because the way it was written, it was like the goal was the good instruction, which was sort of treated as the same as reaching the standard in a way. So I just tried to clarify that the goal is reaching the standard, and instruction and curriculum and supports are all part of that. The bigger one is then what I did in line 6 to 8 was really just as tried to take seriously Zach's point, which we've talked at some previous meetings, which is how do you make this actionable? How do you make this sort of a list of things that the board can actually do something on? And so that we can come back and talk about that. But I added in things I thought we could do, and I took out a couple of things that I wasn't sure we could do, or at least raise questions about it. I think those are the main ones.
I'm seeing many proposed changes, but I'm gonna take your word there for it. And Emily, I'm sorry.
Oh, no, the main ones was at line 6 to 8, and then it's just two small things, the next two, which.
Emily, do you want to share your proposed changes?
Well, the first two are the same as yours. So just picking out all of that list of specific types of students, because I think that then you always are going to leave students out, as you mentioned, and less is more there for sure. And I think the same is true with your second point about taking out the standardized tests and just referring to assessments. My only other addition is to add in safety, which I see that now you have also added. So I like your addition, where we talk about social, emotional, and academic growth. I think we also need to attend to those very real issues that students face. So those were mine. Oh, and I would just say in terms of being actionable, again, just echoing what you said about, I would love to see this become a document that we use regularly, if not at every meeting, where we're checking in to see what aspects of it are relevant to what we're talking about, and are we aligning, and are we taking everything that's in this statement into account when we're thinking about our various resolutions. And so that's how I see it being actionable.
Thanks for that, Emily. I didn't do a good job of framing my edits. I would just underscore in that first one that I discussed, simplifying to all, I also added this phrase of a common academic standard, that we're supporting all students to be able to exceed that common academic standard. I have my opinion of what that means. I'm sure other board members will have reactions or thoughts on that. And then also in the second change where I talk about line 6 through 8, as Emily mentioned, I did talk about adding safety measures as well as state policies. I was hesitant to use the word oversight. I wanted to use the state board shall conduct oversight. And instead, I wrote the state board shall support DC's public schools, so on and so forth, and you can see it there. For the sake of time, what I'm going to ask us to do is to take the next minute, and I see Jessica already added a question. I changed this to view all, so I'm hoping that people can still go in and make comments. You cannot. No. Okay. I'm going to trust people. I'm going to take this off of you all and make edits. If people can go in and make comments based on the written changes here, and then we'll jump into discussion. Feel free to also co-sign. Say it again.
I'm just noticing we're about half hour over time, and so I just want to be sure that we're sticking with things. So if we can do sort of both and do conversation while people are commenting, I think that might be helpful.
Yeah, I actually think this might make it more efficient, actually, to get people's thoughts down, and that way, if the conversation stretches on, we at least have people's thoughts. So only 1 minute. If people can capture your initial reactions to the proposals, as Jessica did here, that way we'll at least have it in the document if we have to cut the conversation short, and then we'll jump into a brief discussion for 5 to 7 minutes.
Zachary, at the moment, I cannot see the comment that I wrote in before you changed the access. That's why I wondered in the chat if it was deleted.
No, it's still there. Okay. For the sake of time here, I'm going to chat out this again. Sorry, I still see it. Maybe it's because I did change it to view all, but then I just changed it back to edit so people could make comments. Can you see it now?
had to refresh in order for it to happen, to pop back up. So maybe that works too.
Mine is refreshing, but everyone's on the bandwidth right now in my building, so it is apparently slow.
Okay. So yeah, if we could take about 60 seconds, even if you agree, it doesn't necessarily have to be a critical comment. It would be great to have every member at least react to one or more of the proposed changes.
So where is Jessica's comment or edit? Is it supposed to be in the Google Doc? Because I don't see it there.
It is in the Google Doc. You may not see it. And so with that, let's just open it up for a discussion. Jessica's comment reads, it's to your edit, Ruth, where you say edit Zach's line 1 through 4. She says, this seems redundant. I applaud the civic action being included. I wonder about the use of the word citizen in the current political climate around immigration and documentation. And then John Paul also added something around like maybe we could use the word individuals. So you see the proposed changes. Let's open up the floor. John Paul, I'll let you call on people based on raised hands, thoughts, reactions, concerns.
So as of now, I don't see, so Jessica has a comment. Jessica?
The only other comment I had was about the removing the standardized assessments from the academic and non-academic measures. And I would oppose that just because I think having some standardized measure across all of our LEAs is one way we ensure equity. And I worry about removing that specific language from this equity statement.
Any other thoughts, reactions? What about Frazier's? I know he didn't get a chance to frame his, but he was asking, what about adding add something that talks about how students grow as a member of society outside of test scores? How might we do that beyond talking about just test scores?
Is that not addressed in the comment about, oh, this is the one that Jessica commented on, that they have the opportunity to become responsible, active, effective, you could say civically engaged individuals instead of citizens, parents, and workers? Or am I not?
No, I think I think it could. I just wanted to give him some airtime since he didn't get a chance to frame it.
And I added a
I guess
comment that,
on that point, I do wonder about, I'm sorry, Marcus, just one last quick thing is, you know, like individual growth, because we're talking about growth according to standards and growth, or, you know, meeting standards, but I wonder if we want to also add something about, you know, students, individual development, something like that.
What were you going to say, Marcus?
yeah, no, I was just gonna say I added a comment along to Jessica's comment that maybe that last section in lines 1 to 4 could read active, impactful members of their families, workplaces, and communities. That I think kind of captures the essence of what we were trying to say there.
Awesome. Any other thoughts, reactions? I would just say, Jessica, I totally hear you on the standardized assessment piece. I actually think standardized assessments are a good thing and that we are useful for a host of reasons. I just thought it was redundant to say that, or to pick that one academic aspect out of like then blanket it saying non-academic and academic aspects of the report card. So I hear you. I just wanted to make sure you were clear that I wasn't proposing taking it out as suggesting it's not important.
Can I say to your comment about meeting a a common standard, I think is the language. Do we want to say it's not a single standard, right? Or is it? Can you explain that a little bit? I mean, is it
The
standards or?
the thought is that as a district, we should establish what we want proficiency to mean. And I don't necessarily mean proficiency on a test score, but I think this goes to the conversations we've been having around both growth and proficiency. That for me, equity means that we're ensuring all students have access to a life well lived and that they can meet a certain bar. And so that's what I mean by common standard, that all students are set up to meet whatever that standard is that we're defining. I don't necessarily think we have to define it in this statement, but those are just my views.
I believe Fraser has a question.
I'm Zach sort of wove what I was talking about into the line 6 through, or Ruth did, in line 6 through 8. So I don't think that, I just want to make sure that we're talking about the whole student as far as equity, rather than just test scores or some kind of a metric that has nothing to do with a person.
I'd like to say that. Thank you, Fraser.
Okay, let's take one more minute just for the sake of time. In terms of process, what I'll do is kind of consolidate with these edits. If I don't see any comments, thoughts, or have heard any pushback, I'll take it as though people are okay with this. I'll send it back out and then we can have conversations offline. And as I mentioned, my hope is that at our May conversation, we can then think about how we might apply it and make it a living statement and document versus just something that sits on the website. Not that that's how we're orienting now, but how we can make it more of a living resource. Okay, so any last thoughts, comments?
Thanks for doing this, Zach.
I will take not hearing anything as the answer being no by just saying teacher and me also would love to see something about instruction. I thought that that might just raise some eyebrows on the part of some people, so I opted not to do that. But I do think there is a place when we're talking about equity that we also include how we're educating our students. So just throwing that out there as well. In case anyone has.
On that note, I guess I would love to see something about engagement from the student end of things. But I'd have to think about where that and if it fits. I'm just going to leave it at that.
Okay, John Paul, thank you. And I'm going to turn this back, or Ruth, I'm going to turn it back to you.
Thanks. I just want to remind members to remember to take down your hands once you've answered the question, so we can make sure that we're on the correct discussion. And I think actually now I'm just going to turn it over to Emily for the discussion on the Latinx resolution.
Thank you, John Paul.
Emily, but sorry, I wasn't on. Before we go forward, I just want to encourage people, if they didn't already comment and say something, send it to Zach, because one thing I've definitely learned is just because people don't raise it at the meeting doesn't mean there's not an issue. So please, let's get it in, and so that Zach can do his best with it, and we'll take it back up to Emily.
Okay, thank you. Can you all hear me? First, I just want to say thank you to all the members for your feedback, both at the last working session and then those of you who sent me comments or questions and feedback. I have worked to incorporate them or address them in one way or another in this new version of the resolution that I hope you had a chance to look at. I also had the opportunity to work, to be part of the Latinx teacher course meeting that they had at the WTU Sharing Vision conference, and then to sort of follow up with them a lot. And they've been really helpful in sort of advising on this. And also I've had input from experts and advocates in the field. So I'm hoping that this resolution that you've had a chance to look at now really reflects that. I feel much better about it. I think it's much clearer in its aim at this point, and I think it now sort of makes clear why it's important and why it's relevant to the state board's work. I think I would just like to point out that, for instance, you know, I think it was Jessica who was pointing out that it would make sense to make the connection to the work we've been doing around teacher retention, and that there's a clear link with that. And so that's why I have included that. That clearly this is aligned with the work we hope to do around teacher diversity, but also really want to point out that what I have learned over this last month since we last met is how important it is not to lump together underrepresented groups. And to what's become really clear to me, especially from working with the Latinx teacher task force, is just how important it is to respect the fact that these are really specific issues and needs that they're facing. So I will just also mention that they've sent out a survey, and within a day they got responses about, and this is why I changed it from Latinx to Latino throughout the solution. I hope you noticed. They got 107 responses in 24 hours, and the responses came back over half preferred Latino, 28 or 26% preferred Hispanic, and 17 or 16% preferred Latinx. So I did change it to Latino based on that, but one thought I have and that I put to you is whether it might make sense just to include all of those identifiers so that nobody is left out, but that's a small detail. What I really want to ask of you is, I think, you know, I hope that this resolution makes clear how important this issue is in our city. And I hope that you will vote for it at our next public meeting. And I want to answer questions, and especially those reservations you might still have. So I'm going to open it up.
Thanks, Emily. Can I also do a quick welcome to baby Michael? Hi, baby Michael.
Hi, baby Michael.
Awesome. Our youngest viewer ever.
Yes, Michael just wanted to say hi to everyone real quick before bed. He was in the other room crying, wanting to say good night.
Night, night. Bye. Sleep well. So Emily, I wanted to just quickly note we appreciate the information, and I think one of the ways that we potentially could get to the naming situation would be we could reference actually the survey or reference the many diverse opinions around the use of the names in a footnote or in something else as part of the resolution. And then after the comment from that, I think Fraser may have a comment as well.
Okay, that's great. Thank you, John Paul. I like that idea. Oh, so should I call on people?
I can do so because I'm the only one that can see the hands.
Yeah, can you do that? That'd be helpful. Thanks.
Fraser?
Yes, I've got a couple of things. One is the English teacher in me, and the other is I agree with that we should just call it Latino. But I think that your footnote is a good idea too. I just have a question on the lines from line 51 on, where the first bullet says the Office of the State Superintendent of Education conduct. Okay, whereas the office conduct or conducts. And I want to, because it sort of, it changes around with in the next page where it either has a singular, we're talking about OSSI. Are we talking about OSSI as a, if it's the office of the state superintendent, then it should be a singular, I mean, a singular verb. Is that being picky?
Can I just say, it's not picky if it's right, but can we stick to the substance? Not debated. I mean, there's an answer, right? I'm probably listening to the English teacher, but.
That's substance to me, because I don't want something going out like that if it's not right.
No, I agree. We should defer to the grammarian. I just want to use our time on debating it, because you're probably right.
Yeah.
Okay. And my other quibble is, this is awfully long for a resolution, isn't it?
Could be.
And I was thinking that you could put some of the paragraphs together so that it might wind up being just a 2-page resolution rather than a 3-page resolution. But I'm just asking John Paul about that.
I mean, we've had longer resolutions.
Okay,
I'm always for brevity since I have to read them all. But I don't think, if there's important things to mention, the length really doesn't matter, because we want to mention all the things that are important. So
okay.
I think,
I'm not saying that I think all of them are important. It's just that I didn't know about how long. I mean, because we haven't had, I don't think we've had a resolution that was this long before, at least since I've been on the board.
Right.
But that's a great answer. Thank you.
Yeah, and I will just say that I did take pains to make sure that I both, streamlined it as much as possible and also included everything that I heard that I think is essential. There may be ways to combine some of these things if technically they go together, right? Like if
I don't think you need to. I don't think you need to.
All right, thank you. Others?
Hey, Emily, thanks for your work on this. A couple of things. In line 56, well, to the point of either just saying Latino or including all, it reads Latino, Hispanic, and bilingual teacher candidates. I would just encourage us to be consistent there. I don't know if you mean to include both Latino and Hispanic there in that sentence, if that changes things.
Where are you?
Line 56.
Okay.
To your point around either just saying Latino or including all of the headers.
Being consistent.
Yeah, that's a minor thing. The other thing that I was going to call out was just around specificity. Or did you or others have thoughts around, for instance, line 65 through 67, where it says deliberate steps be taken by relevant agencies to build these things? Like, do we want to spell that out, or should we just leave it pretty general? That's one thought. And then I think to the comment that was made, I'm going to make one comment and one suggestion that you can leave or take. The comment is it could be worth adding a whereas section, which just acknowledges that all of the things you've listed out here for Latino students could be true for any other subset of students, i.e. Black students, for instance, and it really resonates. So I don't think you need to do that, but it could, because I remember one of the comments is like, oh, are we going to make a resolution for Black students or Asian students, so on and so forth. And maybe that could satisfy their concern. The thing I was going to talk about was the push you're making here around bilingual education, that the council create an office that will craft this long-term vision. And this is on line 58. I get it. I get it. But I think, again, I would just say the reality of bilingual education in Ward 1, I'm assuming, must look very different than bilingual education in large in Ward 5? Because when I think of bilingual education in Ward 5, and this isn't all of the programs, but in large part, they are flooded with very affluent families that are coming from parts of the city that are not necessarily representative of the students. Again, I think you're making this resolution for. So I just want to underscore that that I think painting this with a broad brush may not get to the desired outcome.
Can I just say though that I think if you read more closely the council's reasoning behind wanting this office, it's to address exactly that issue that you raise, right? It's that, yes, we should have sorry, I am being distracted by this. We should have bilingual education for students who are Spanish speaking students, right? But we want to expand it to Ward 5. We want to expand it throughout the city because it is an equity issue. So I'm not putting that explicitly in this.
Are you opposed to drawing out the distinction that, and I'm thinking of a principal in Ward 1, I won't name them, where they said, Zach, the affluent families around this school, their children leave and graduate much more or fluent rather in Spanish than native speaking Spanish speakers who are coming from households where the families are speaking Spanish. And he was talking about how heartbreaking that is. And so I wonder whether there's an opportunity to just draw that distinction in this resolution to make it very clear without a doubt that this isn't a blanket bilingual resolution, but this is an equity push for students who could benefit most from it. And I believe that we could talk offline. I don't think that necessarily kills the resolution, but I think it just reads very general. And based on where you are in the city, I think bilingual education looks very different.
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, sure, we could add a line. It's easy. And what I was going to say is that to answer your first question, though, about like being more explicit about what we want OSSI to do or what we want these different agencies to do, the purpose of creating this office is to create that infrastructure to support all those things that follow. Because without that, it's frankly quite unlikely that we'll be able to do all of these things, right? And the purpose of having the an office like that and the funding to support it is to make all of those things that, or many of the things that follow, more realistic, if that makes sense. So it's something that would benefit students citywide, but it also would make this resolution, the recommendations in this resolution specific to Latino teachers, more realistic, if that makes sense. But I mean, we can work on that together, Zach, if you want, or you can send me suggested language. And
I believe Ruth has a question as well.
No, I'm was taking advantage of the lull to move to the next item on the agenda.
okay.
So we're moving to the committees. I'm aware that it's 7. What I would propose to do is take the student activity, this committee first, and then move straight to social studies, because I see Justin is here. I know that's a presentation. Then we can go to the other committees that are, don't have outside people. Is that okay with everybody?
Great.
All right.
Alex? Mr. O'Sullivan?
Yeah. Wait, what was that? Sorry.
So if you could give us a quick update on the student advisory committee.
Okay. Yeah, and is Deja on the call too?
She had to drop out.
Yeah.
But for for the student advisory committee, we have two sort of subcommittees basically. The one I'm doing is about basically productivity in the classroom, and Deja's is post-secondary preparation for after high school. For hers, it's like looking at essay or like standardized tests, I'm pretty sure, and then also just like other non-conventional ways besides college that students may like explore after high school. And for mine, it's more so just like what can like we do to like provide students and like teachers the best resources for their own success in the classroom. So what I'm looking at is like a variety of things such as like the relationship between students and teachers. One of the things is like class size, uh, learning, like different learning and teaching methods, whether that's like lectures from a PowerPoint, or whether that's more like interactive learning through a project or through like field trip and things like that. The stage that I'm at, I'm right now collecting results for like polls that I've done, or that my subcommittee has done on the the side of maximizing productivity within the classroom. And I'm pretty sure Asia has finished collecting her results from her poll. And when I finish collecting mine, we should look to start writing our resolution.
Thank you. And I do want to note for just calendaring, next student advisory committee meeting for that group will be held on Monday. And we are doing the same thing that we're doing tonight, of a WebEx virtual call. So really appreciate the students' participation in that as well. So I'm going to turn it over now to, if there's no questions, turn it over to Jessica, as well as Justin Tooley from OSSE to do the social studies committee. And Alex, Ju, if you can make Jessica the presenter.
I'm going to turn the speech over to you for now, but I'll control our slides, okay?
Great. Thank you so much. And John Paul for helping me get set up. I was a little scattered. I think I get what's going on now. And it's good to be with the state board. It's been a little while since I've seen all of you all, and I can see most of you all virtually. I'm still trying to figure out a lot of the functionality of WebEx, but maybe by the time this is over, I will be an expert in all of these different softwares that I have to use in a given day. For those that don't know me, I'm Justin Tooley. I'm the Deputy Chief of Staff at OSSE. I've been working with Jess and John Paul over the past few weeks into months on figuring out how we are going to move forward on embarking on a new mission that we're going to have together in reviewing and updating our social studies standards. So this presentation is a joint presentation with them, and reflects our best thinking today on the presentation. Is we will talk about roles and responsibilities between the state board and OSSE and other stakeholders in this process. And then also we'll be able to give you a high-level timeline of the review and revision process. Next slide, Jess. So to ground everyone, we'll move through these first few slides pretty quickly. What are educational standards? These are statements of learning of what students should know and be able to do at each grade level in the social studies. As many of you know, I think we had our first history project between John Paul and Jess, trying to figure out exactly how old our social studies standards are. That still seems to be an open question. And we will figure out the answer to that at some point, and we will do an inquiry into the history of these social studies standards to figure out exactly how old they are. But we know that they're at least 10 years old. And we wanted to identify a few potential weaknesses in the standards as they're currently written, and there may be others. And this isn't meant to convey any of the universe of strengths and weaknesses of the standards, but a few that we wanted to focus on: limited perspectives of viewpoints, Eurocentric, low-level thinking. So a lot of what students are asked to do is a low-level on Bloom's taxonomy, define and identify. There's not a lot of higher-order thinking skills, especially reflected in some of in Common Core, and then in our DC language arts and our DC language arts standards. And it doesn't sync with our ELA standards well. So some of the things that we're having our students do in English language arts, reading complex text, comparing text, those skills aren't necessarily reflected in our social studies standards. So this may be the time to think about those weaknesses. Next slide. So some instructional guiding principles is that we believe that social studies prepares young people for college careers and civic life. And now more than ever, we know that participation in our civic process is very, very important. We believe that inquiry is at the heart of social studies. We believe that social studies involves interdisciplinary applications and welcomes the integration of all content areas. For example, students should be able to use information that they learn in science about technology to understand how innovation impacts societies and cultures, and how that has a historical effect. Social studies is composed of deep and enduring understandings, concepts, and skills for disciplines. So social studies cannot be really taught well without excellent reading and writing skills, research skills. We believe that all of those skills come right into play in the social studies and should be reflected there. And again, we believe that the standard should have a direct and explicit connection to our state standards in English language. So what would these revisions mean for students? We are looking for that the standards would describe what learners need to understand, so the knowledge that they should be able to have. The standard should also articulate what learners should be capable of doing. And then also, how will they demonstrate that understanding? So what products our students should be able to produce, or what activities should they be able to demonstrate in civic participation? So as we sort of move on to process, is that there are a lot of different stakeholders that are going to be engaging in this work. The Office of the State Superintendent of Education, we are charged with drafting and proposing standards for approval, and also using our supports in our Division of Teaching and Learning to provide instructional supports to teachers to improve their practice that's aligned to the standards. I believe that when we, in our most recent update of the Next Generation Science Standards and the subsequent assessment, this is what a lot of people found extremely valuable when we were talking to teachers, giving teachers the opportunity to engage deeply with the standards and think about what students are supposed to be doing, and being able to show what they know, and talking with one another across schools, across LEAs, and really being able to think very deeply and intentionally about what the standards mean for instruction. The State Board of Education role is you are popularly elected, you should articulate the values and expectations for the social studies standards and instruction in the city. So using your, I guess, your bully pulpit to make sure that the public has a place to go to reflect their views, and then helping all of us synthesize those views of the public. And then also the approval body of our standards. Our standards are required to be approved by the state board pursuant to DC law. Educator role, we believe that our educators are going to have a significant role to play in the development of our standards and also the execution of our standards. Teachers possess deep instructional expertise and will be very valuable in the review and revision process. And they also are the ones that bring the standards to life. Standards, it doesn't get taught on its own just because we publish these and put them on our website, publish, approve them, and put them on our website. It's really up to educators to use outstanding instruction and curricular resources to bring those standards to life. It's a very important job. And then the public. We believe that the public has a significant role in articulating the expectations that we have for our students in the city. And we look forward to engaging them through multiple vehicles, which we'll talk about later on in the presentation.
Thank you, Justin. John Paul notified me that there are 2 members with their hands up, so I just want to pause here and see if either Ruth or Fraser has a question about what we've covered so far.
Sorry, mine was up from before. I have some, but I'll hold.
Okay. Fraser, anything for now or something that we can get to later?
I don't know how to work the hand.
Okay, fair enough. Then I'm going to keep going.
I lowered it.
Thanks, Fraser. To the point that Justin was making, as we work in partnership with OSSI, we have talked about what roles and responsibilities each entity will take on. And so this is what I've discussed with the committee so far, and we're now sharing it. The state board will lead an advisory committee. We'll run this much like a task force would be run out of the state board and has been run in the past, like the ESSA task force or the high school grad rates task force as examples. We'll compose that advisory committee of various public stakeholders, including content experts, folks from institutions of higher education who prepare social studies teachers. We'll hopefully involve LEA representatives, so folks who work in curriculum for DC public schools and in our public charter LEAs. We'll have, we hope, teacher voice, student voice, parent voice came up in our last committee meeting. And we definitely will have a representative from OSSI on that committee. The roles of that committee are to advise on how we should engage the public, surveys, ward level meetings, et cetera. We really want to get input from that advisory committee. We'll also hear from them on technical experts who can tell us about best practices. You know, this is something of particular importance that Ruth has brought up, making sure that we know who some of the best minds are on some of the issues that will face us in social studies, and making sure that those folks get before the advisory committee. Once all that input gets to the advisory committee, their job will be to synthesize all the input from the public and then articulate out a list of values and principles for how OSSI and their technical committee should take on the actual writing of new and revised standards. OSSI is going to lead that committee. They'll comprise that committee of social studies educators from both public charter schools and DC public schools, as well as local and national experts in social studies. They'll go ahead and take the recommendations of the advisory committee, using those to update and revise the social studies standards. And then they'll bring those back to the state board and their advisory committee for review, ideally with a vote by the state board. So we'll go on to process this laid out in more chunks. As we think about the timeline for this, we're now in this part of the plan, April to September, roughly. We have updated this to be reflective of the current moment where there's a lot of uncertainty about what lie ahead of us in budget conversations, as well as when schools and teachers are back to something resembling what we knew to be normal before. So OSSI and the state board will present as we are tonight. We'll develop a process for selecting members of an advisory committee. We'll eventually convene the members of the advisory committee. And then we'll be working on how to assign personnel to work on social study standards. I'm just going to put a point on that. To John Paul's earlier point, we are absolutely considering the budget implications of this COVID crisis and what it means for any possible hope we had to get additional staff resources to work on standards. So we may have to be creative and come up with a plan B. Have that advisory committee convened. We'll go ahead and engage the public. We'll build our knowledge of what we're going to do with the standards. We'll go ahead and get the feedback and have the advisory committee synthesize it. We'll draft out the guiding principles for how we would like OSSI and their technical committee to approach writing the standards. And we will take probably some sort of vote on adopting those guiding principles before they're sent to OSSI. we're thinking about asking the members of the advisory committee. We imagine they'll want to also ask some of these questions of the public. I'm not going to read them to you, but you'll see that they focus on what's good and not so good about our current standards. How do we think about prioritizing things in the standards? Where do we leave flexibility for teachers in the standards? How do we think about organizing the standards? And then what do we want a student to know and be able to do when they graduate after their full education in DC social studies? Once we've got that adopted set of things for the advisory committee, we'll hand this off to the technical committee here, which again is led by OSSI. You'll see the kind of things that OSSI will do with that committee. And the time frame for that is really the bulk of 2021. So I imagine they'll be leveraging teachers' time in summer to participate in writing, revising standards. And by the end of this period, OSSI will be bringing back a revised draft to the state board. So we'll get back written standards, but there will be less, I imagine, that OSSI will be doing during this point. Last stage of this is the exciting stage. Once the standards are written, the public gets some comment on, there'll be a comment on standards. We'll go ahead and make sure that any revisions that are suggested by the state board or the advisory committee are incorporated into the standards. And then we get to the point where OSSI brings the standards to the state board for a vote. And so the great hope is that we'll have that done by middle of the year 2022, with OSSI then go forward on rolling out these standards and questions for LEAs. So key thing we'll do here at the end is, as we think about how to engage the public throughout the process, one thing OSSI and the state board are both cognizant of is that we don't want to start asking for broad public comment at the beginning and then have more broad public comment at the end. One lesson we've learned from states that have had problematic standards revisions processes is when the field is too open for questions at the end. Once we've got revised standards, we can run into problems with states having to make many rounds of changes. So one key thing we're going to charge our advisory committee with is to say, once you've set out your principles, when we get to the end of the process, the real question before us all is, do standards as written reflect what the advisory committee and the state board asked of the writing committee? So the goal is to front load getting all of our pieces worked out at the beginning so that we can have a smooth and cooperative process through. So I have a hand up from Fraser. Fraser, what's your question?
Go back one slide.
I sure can.
At the third bullet under actions, you mean should it be to the State Board of Education for approval?
Thank you for catching an error. You're right. OSSI submits standards and resolution to SBOE for approval. Make that correction before it gets uploaded again. Zachary, question from you.
The public comment, who is leading that, or is that a joint effort between OSSI and the state board?
I'll see it together. Our goal here in public is to really work with the advisory committee and get their best thinking on that. So the hope is that we'll be engaging the public in a whole variety of ways. We've talked about a number of those on the committee. We've talked about doing ward level conversations. We've talked about having opportunities for public panels at our public meetings. We've talked about surveys. And I think all of those are very reasonable proposals, but it will happen in this phase of the work. So September to December.
If I could just, I'm sorry.
I'm sorry, but when the draft standards are provided from OSSI, the question there was like, is that OSSI driving that public comment, or
Justin, do you want to chime in on that?
That advisory committee going to determine what that could look like?
Sure. I think we're open to think we're open to more conversation around the nuts and bolts of what engagement looks like at both points. What I believe we were trying to articulate tonight is the sequence in which we would be thinking about public engagement. I think what has worked for both OSSI and the state board is leveraging the advisory committee to do public engagement. So making sure that the people on the advisory committee are not only good people with expertise, but also have deep connections in community to go and be able to engage the public. And we've certainly provided resources in the past with the ESSA task force to provide tools to help people give feedback on different proposals that we were considering. We don't have a specific plan on engagement right now, but we're certainly open to different tools and processes that may come about.
I think our next question is from Ruth.
Hi, and I turned, okay, I may have to take off my picture because I now changed and people may be walking by, but hopefully not. So I like the way that was, you just described the role of the advisory group and the board coming up with a set of principles. And I'm raising it because when I read it, it was, I'm trying to fully understand the back and forth, both between OSSI and the board and between the board and the committee. Some of the slides suggest it didn't make clear where things were coming from, but as you're describing it, the initial principles are really coming through some process, but coming up through the advisory board and then through a process presumably between the advisory board and the state board. OSSI's on that advisory board, on the advisory board. So the principles are coming out of that process.
Yes. So as I understand it, Ruth, the way I think I would describe it is we pick people through an open application process to be on an advisory committee. We have some conversations with the advisory committee. The advisory committee helps determine the process for public engagement. We all go through the process of public engagement. All the public engagement comes to the advisory committee. They synthesize it and say, here's everything we think we heard from the public. Based on that, here are the guiding principles we think should be used in writing new standards for DC. The state board reviews those and hopefully votes to adopt those guiding principles. We hand those off to OSSI. OSSI and their technical committee uses those principles to write the new standards.
I mean, that sounds right, provided there's a back and forth between the advisory committee and the board. That's robust during that process, so that at the end of it, you're adopting something that the board feels comfortable with, as well as the advisory committee. So that's what I just want to.
So Ruth, Paul, I just wanted to hop in real quickly because I think you're absolutely hitting on what is really important for folks to take away from this, is that the way that this was developed in partnership between Jessica and Justin and me and the state and the discussions with the committee and all that type of thing, the advisory committee advises the state board, right? It is our committee that we are setting up to help us do this process. And it will be certainly an iterative process in terms of gathering information, talking with members of the public and with the experts that are on the advisory committee to make sure that the state board is able to make the best decisions possible with all of the information that they need to do so. So I think you're hitting it exactly right in terms of what we're talking about. And this is very similar, as you'll remember, and maybe Marcus can talk about this too, in terms of the setting up of the committees, both the ESSA task force and the high school graduation requirements task force, were set up so that information could be brought together in a discussion and then brought to the board for decision making. And I think the iterative part, the back and forth part, will likely be exactly as you're talking about. You know, the advisory committee will talk with the state board about what they're seeing, the development of the principles, whether that's in individual conversations or in the social studies committee or all of those kinds of things. I think those are all options for the advisory committee to engage with the state board on. And then at the end, there's that, as Jessica was talking about, they will come to the state board with a proposal for principles that we can examine, look at, and determine whether or not we, you know, royal we of state board agree with the principles prior to sending them to OSSI. So I think one of the things that I really appreciate about this process is that it does contain a lot more opportunities for the individual members as well as the state board as a whole to participate in a discussion around these things. And this is one of the things too that I think we've learned, both the staff and Jessica through her research has learned from other states who have stumbled in some of these things, and I think a lot of what is designed here and is also in line with what we're thinking from OSSI, you know, was designed with some of those stumbles in mind to make sure that we don't have a 6-year or some sort of process where we have people who are not feeling like they were engaged. So I think you're hitting it exactly right.
Yeah, I also just want to say, and I apologize, I should have said this at the beginning, I'm really incredibly thankful to OSSI for all the time that they've put in to work with us on this, and to get to a place where we have this cooperative, collaborative plan at the start. I think this is a huge undertaking for any state education agency to undertake, and it will be a big project that we all take on together, but I'm delighted that the superintendent is prioritizing this, and really grateful for the staff time she's given to us already to help plan things out. Any other questions? Great, then I am going to stop sharing this if I can figure out how to do that. Yay! And turn this back over. Thank you, Justin, for joining us, and thanks everyone.
Thanks, it was good to see you all. Stay healthy and social distance. And if you need anything, feel free to reach out. And I'll probably see you in a couple weeks for the public session. And I believe the superintendent, I'm anticipating her being there with me as well.
Right. Thanks, Justin. And Jessica, so we will, at the Social Studies Committee, will be looking at that process as well, right? So that we can make some clarifications in it, just sort of capture what John Paul was just saying.
Yes, absolutely. And the other thing that will happen in our next Social Studies Committee meeting is what we talked about this most recent meeting, the questions for the advisory committee application, making sure that we have a good, clear process that we're all comfortable with to select advisory committee members that can help us do this well.
Okay, all right. So committees, thank you very much, Jessica. That was terrific. So committees, I'm hoping everybody, and I will hold myself to this, can go quickly as opposed to not quickly. So let's start with, I think teacher retention is the first on the list.
Is Alex with us, John Paul?
No, he's not.
Yeah, I am. I'm here.
Okay.
Where are you?
He's right there. I see him. I just like to say, before Alex starts, I want to thank Alex for everything he's done. And we're rolling, but we've had a small setback that we can't get any information to anybody or any information back, but everything has been done. All right, Alex, it's all yours.
I would also just add that, and I might call out Malayo right now, but Malayo and I, but definitely more so Malayo, has been working very closely with the Office of Cable Television, Media, Film, and Entertainment on finalizing the teacher attrition video, which I think will be really exciting once it's done. It's about a 4-minute video that really highlights teachers, researchers, some of our facts that we found from our teacher attrition reports in a really compelling short narrative to share. But that'll probably be used, at a future date and time when we actually are, sharing out our report a little bit more, when the times and circumstances are a little bit different.
That's it, Ruth.
Okay, then.
Thank you, Alex.
Well
Welcome.
ended. Zach, Emily?
Oh, sorry, didn't hear you.
I'll give a quick update on the standards research. Obviously, with school out of session, given COVID-19 situation, we're having to press pause, and we're hoping to provide an update when we learn more about timelines in the next month or two. But we have until, if I'm not mistaken, we have until the end of September to make good on the funds that have been allocated for the project. And we are cautiously optimistic that we might be able to resume the project before then, perhaps at the beginning of the next school year.
Emily?
Oh, sorry. So yeah. So on access to well-rounded education, I actually will turn to the staff to give us an update on the SOW.
So this is John Paul again. So we are still in the process of finalizing the all teacher survey to get it into pass, and have it sort of ready to go as soon as we come back to whatever we'll end up with at the end of the COVID emergency. So we are on track to, I believe, get it up and ready probably within the next week or so. As you can expect, most of the staff from Office of Contracting and Procurement has been detailed to the COVID response, and so they are hard at work trying to make sure that we have all of the functions that we need. But we really appreciate their support on this as well.
Yeah, and I will just add that we met on Monday and we talked about sort of starting now to think about the SOW for phase 2, which will involve focus groups and interviews with teachers and principals, just so we're ready with that in the fall. And then we also just started a conversation about how we might play a bigger role, we being the state board, in sort of having a campaign around the issue of access to well-rounded education. And I think a bunch of us talked about how that might start now during the social distancing and what it looks like in the curriculum that's being rolled out now. And so this is still very much just in the discussion phase, but that's where we are right now with this work. I'm done.
Ruth for research?
Ruth for research, yes. So the research committee, we have started our review of the STAR framework, something that the board committed to when it first adopted that framework 4 years ago, whatever it was, 5 years ago, 3 years ago. And as we committed in our priorities last summer. So we have a couple things going on, but what I want to just report to people is yesterday the committee had, I thought, a really fascinating discussion with 2 people locally who have been doing a lot of looking at the framework and how it has played out. One is, so we heard from in our sort of virtual meeting, Betsy Wolf, who has been looking at the results from STAR for a while. She's a researcher at Johns Hopkins and talked to us a lot about the correlations between the ratings and socioeconomic status of students and raised questions about it. And then also Erin Cuny, who's working with a group of charter school leaders and folks who have sort of similar but different or parallel concerns about whether or not the framework as it stands is adequately capturing quality at the school level, or is it capturing something else? And it was a great start to, we've been doing a lot of sort of prep work, but I thought it was a great start to hearing out some of the issues. We're going to meet in a week, I guess, a week from today to sort of take some next steps. And we expect to have this topic on the agenda of the May meeting, which we'll talk about next week. And so that would really sort of, in a public way, put us moving forward on this issue. And then if anybody hasn't seen it, well, I talked about this last time, the timeline is up there. We're going to try to adopt some recommendations maybe by July, so that we can sort of be working in tandem, asking OSSI to be looking at them so we can be thinking about them. Because OSSI, if it was going to make any requests for changes, would have to have those requests in by the following spring, by the following March.
So Ruth, this is John Paul. I do want to also note some comments from Zachary in the chat. I don't know if he wants to talk about those in person, but I also want to note too that the committee discussed some of the timeline issues that may and budget issues that may shift because of COVID as well. And this, all of this statement of work that we're talking about, both for well-rounded education and research, may be impacted, and we just don't know yet.
Yeah, although I think I don't think the budget affects the research work so much. Am I missing something?
Well, we had potentially talked about shifting some of the research maybe to some other subjects, both in well-rounded and during the research committee. But we can also do that during the committee discussion next week as well.
Okay. Yeah. No, I didn't follow that exactly. Okay. But I think it doesn't have a big budget, and there's not, and there may be ways to get some of what we're talking about at a cheaper price anyway. So that's fine. Zach, do you want to say anything about your survey?
Sure. As Ruth mentioned,
I mean, specifically on the STAR framework. It wasn't an opening for the whole survey, but for the.
I know. But just quickly framing that the survey was an opportunity to just hear from parents, teachers, school leaders. And one of the interesting findings from parents was that on a scale of 1 to 5, the overwhelming majority, 5 being that the STAR framework was important to them in making school choices, the overwhelming majority of parents selected 4 and 5, which sends a message that this is important, that they are keeping track of it. We then asked them to expound on that selection. And what was really interesting is that a lot of parents, while they like the idea of their child attending a 4 and 5 star school, they're not clear on how the metrics are determined. They're not clear on how they change from year to year. And some parents even said they didn't even know that DC had a new school report card. So it just kind of, as I was mentioning in the comment, to me sends the message that this research is timely, but also there is some work that we as board members could do to just continue getting the message out. Whether we agree with it or not, I do think it's parents' right to at least be informed.
And along that line, one thing I did not mention, because we didn't get to it at yesterday's meeting, but we will next week, is we've had a lot of discussion about how to take a survey out to the public, maybe through our warden meetings, through newsletters and other things. And Emily drafted something up, and we haven't formally discussed it, but it's out there. People can look at it, and next week, hopefully we really will, and we can start moving on that. Okay, I take that silent. I'm sorry, I can't see my participant. Oh, and I can't see the hands anyway. So I take that silence. I mean, we're ready to go to whatever's next. Is that right?
Yes. If I could just make one quick comment about the research committee's work that I'm really proud of, is just how deliberative we've been around local researchers and national researchers. And when we say national researchers, I think we're showing some pretty significant names in the hat, which I think can make the findings that more appealing to the public, I would say. But it also, I think, will yield opportunities for partnership between the state board and various state agencies or universities, which I'm really excited about as well. So just really excited about the research committee's work.
Next, I think, is admin committee, and I don't think there's a report. Am I right?
I don't believe there's necessarily a report, although I do want to note for the board that the admin committee does have a scheduled meeting tomorrow at 11 a.m., which will also be done virtually. After that meeting, if there's anything to report out to the board, I'll make sure to send an email around.
All right. And is that it? Are we at the end? New business?
I have one more thing. I'm sorry. We're not too far off now, right?
10 minutes, 13 minutes.
Okay. I'm going to be really quick. I just wanted to let everybody know I meant to do this at the last working meeting, but it was so late I didn't, which is that in late January, John Paul sent around an invitation from OSCE's Environmental Literacy Plan Working Group for somebody to join, and I did. There have been 3 meetings so far, and I've attended 2 of them. And basically, the goal of this group is to revise the existing environmental literacy plan from 2014. And this plan serves as a roadmap for development of knowledge, attitudes, and skills necessary to make informed decisions concerning the relationship among natural and urban systems. I am going to share with you in an email with members the new goals and objectives statement, which we worked on in the first and second meetings. And I did ask, so the person who is heading this up is Grace Manabe from OSCE. And I asked her if there's anything she specifically wanted from us, from the state board. And what she wrote back was that that she would like us to think about what activities we might want to pursue over the next few years, or would want students to pursue, I think, or schools. So, and then the working group can pick that up. So the example she gave was that, I guess, some years ago, the SBOE established a green practices committee to reduce waste, protect the environment, and better align its green efforts with best practices followed by the government agencies and schools nationwide. So that was something the state board came up with. But I'm just wondering if anyone wants to work on this with me. It would just be like a matter of hours, not, weeks or anything. Like, could be one session where we come up with some ideas that we would then present at a working group and get input on. So you don't have to answer now, but I'll send out an email. And I mainly just wanted you to know that I was on this.
Thank you.
Yep.
Any other old or new business?
I would just say that as we're pulling folks together to get updates on the COVID response, I would also pull in my school, DC. A friend of mine who was following my updates from tonight's meeting says that schools have been reaching out to the schools that she's matched with, have actually been reaching out to her, urging her to physically bring in documents to complete enrollment. And so just making sure that we know what the standard process is for how schools are handling enrollment moving forward, or during the emergency, I think would be really helpful. And to make sure that my school, DC, sends out guidance to families on what to do if they're getting those calls.
Marcus, can you send me information about which schools and what we're talking about so I can bring it up to the DME?
Sure, absolutely.
Thank you.
And actually, Jean-Paul, that reminds me, in your meeting with the DME, has anyone talked about this issue that we know has to be coming about somehow altering graduation requirements?
So,
Also recovery.
so as I reported to the leadership a little bit earlier, those conversations are just now sort of starting, and there isn't any decision being made yet. They're still gathering information at the OSSI level from some LEAs and some partners, and so I have been told that at the state board will be involved in those conversations at some point, but it's unclear sort of when or where, depending on when they can start shifting some resources from the response over to thoughts on recovery.
Great. All right, last words. Okay, can I just adjourn it?
Yes.
Question. I've got one question. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Go ahead, Frieder.
When you said, John Paul, that the SBOE is going to be involved in that conversation, has anyone ever said how come we weren't involved in the conversation when we sent that letter?
No.
Thank you. Good night, everybody.
Good night, everybody. Go have a Zoom virtual cocktail party.
Thank you. Bye.
Says.
Night.
Good night, everybody. Stay healthy. Stay safe.